What happens when you run from the most ruthless crime boss in New York, carrying his unborn child? Amelia thought her disappearance was flawless. She left the diamonds, the credit cards, and her old life behind on their third wedding anniversary, slipping away like a ghost. But she made one fatal, careless mistake in her panic. She forgot to empty the bathroom trash. When Leonardo Costa walked into their empty penthouse and found that positive pregnancy test, a citywide manhunt began. This is a story of love, betrayal, and survival. The crystal chandelier in the foyer of the Upper East Side penthouse cast a fractured, prismatic light across the marble floor. Amelia Costa stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her hands trembling as she smoothed the fabric of her simple, unassuming grey sweater. At 240 pounds, Amelia had never fit the mold of a mafia don't wife. In a world populated by razor-thin socialites, Pilates-sculpted heiresses, and women whose sharp edges mirrored the violence of the men they married, Amelia was entirely soft. She was a woman of lush curves, thick thighs, and a deeply ingrained insecurity that even the most powerful man in the city couldn't entirely erase. For 3 years, the whispers in the glittering ballrooms and the hushed gossip in the back rooms of high-end boutiques had haunted her. Leonardo Costa could have any supermodel in the world. Why her? Why the fat girl from Queens? Leonardo had always silenced those whispers with a cold, terrifying glare. Behind closed doors, he worshipped her body, tracing the stretch marks on her hips as if they were a road map to salvation. He would bury his face in the soft swell of her stomach and tell her she was the only real thing in his entire, blood-soaked world. But love, Amelia had learned, was not enough to wash away the blood. She looked away from the mirror and down at the sleek black leather duffel bag resting on the bed. Today was July 17th, their third wedding anniversary. In exactly 4 hours, Leonardo would return from what he called a board meeting at the docks, likely carrying a velvet box from Tiffany & Co. and the metallic, coppery scent of violence that he could never completely scrub from his skin. Amelia walked over to the mahogany vanity and opened the bottom drawer. Tucked beneath a stack of silk scarves was a hollowed-out copy of Wuthering Heights. Inside was $50,000 in untraceable cash. She had been siphoning it slowly for 8 months, taking out an extra 100 here, 200 there, claiming it was for lavish tips or cash-only artisan bakeries. Leonardo, whose wealth was astronomical, never noticed the missing drops in his ocean of money. She stuffed the cash into the false bottom of the duffel bag. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The turning point hadn't been the whispers about her weight. It hadn't even been the suffocating, paranoid lifestyle of living with security guards stationed outside her bedroom. The turning point had come 3 days ago, when she had gone into Leonardo's home office to bring him a cup of chamomile tea. The heavy oak door had been slightly ajar. Through the crack, she had seen Leonardo standing over a man named Frankie Russo. Frankie had been pleading for his life, tears streaming down his bruised face. Amelia had watched in paralyzed horror as the man who held her so gently every night raised a suppressed pistol and shot Frankie squarely in the chest. Leonardo's face had been entirely blank, cold, dead. Amelia had backed away, her hands clamped over her mouth to muffle her own screams, and locked herself in the master bathroom. And it was there, sitting on the cold marble tiles, shaking uncontrollably, that she had taken the test. She was late. She had been feeling nauseous for weeks, attributing it to the stress and her fluctuating weight. But when those two stark pink lines appeared on the plastic wand, the reality of her situation came crashing down with the force of a tidal wave. She was carrying Leonardo Costa's child. She placed a protective hand over her lower belly, closing her eyes as a rogue tear slipped down her cheek. "I won't let him turn you into a monster," she whispered to the empty room. "I won't let you grow up thinking murder is just a business transaction." Amelia moved methodically. She left her phone on the nightstand. She left her driver's license, her passports, and her black American Express card. She slipped the 5-carat diamond engagement ring and her platinum wedding band off her plump fingers. The absence of the heavy metal felt strange, leaving a pale indentation on her skin. She placed the rings precisely in the center of the kitchen island, right next to the espresso machine Leonardo used every morning. No note. A note could be analyzed by psychologists, pulled apart for clues. Silence was her best weapon. She grabbed a nondescript beige trench coat, trying to disguise her silhouette as much as possible, and pulled a dark beanie over her auburn hair. She slung the duffel bag over her shoulder. It was heavy, but the weight of her impending freedom was heavier. She slipped out the service elevator. The building's security system was state-of-the-art, but Amelia had spent 3 years learning the blind spots. The camera in the basement loading dock had a 3-second panning delay. She timed it perfectly, stepping out into the muggy afternoon air of New York City just as a laundry delivery truck obscured the view of the street. She didn't hail a cab. Cabs had cameras and GPS. Instead, she walked 3 blocks, the friction of her thighs rubbing together beneath her slacks, a familiar discomfort, until she reached a crowded subway station. She paid for a Metro card in cash, descending into the dark, sweltering tunnels of the city. Amelia Costa was dead. Now she was just a mother, trying to save her child. Leonardo Costa stepped out of the bulletproof Cadillac Escalade, the heavy New York rain slicking his tailored Tom Ford suit. He didn't wait for his driver, Paulie, to open the umbrella. He just wanted to get upstairs. It had been a brutal 48 hours. The Russian syndicate in Brighton Beach had tried to hijack a shipment of high-grade weaponry, and Leonardo had been forced to handle the negotiations personally. Negotiations in the Costa family usually involved brass knuckles and a blowtorch. He was exhausted. His knuckles were split and bruising, and despite 3 showers at the safe house, he felt filthy. But today was his anniversary. 3 years ago, he had stood at an altar in St. Patrick's Cathedral and promised to protect the only woman who had ever looked at him without an ounce of fear or expectation. Amelia. His sweet, beautiful Mia. He patted his coat pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of the velvet box. Inside was a custom-made diamond and sapphire necklace that had cost him $500,000. It would look perfect against the soft, pale skin of her collarbone. He punched in his code in the private elevator, his broad shoulders slumping as the doors closed. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, he allowed the cold, calculating Mafia Boss persona to melt away. Here, in the sky, he was just Leo. The elevator doors chimed and slid open directly into the foyer. "Mia!" he called out, his deep, raspy voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I'm home, baby. I know I'm late, I'm sorry." Silence. Usually the smell of garlic, simmering tomatoes, or baking vanilla would hit him the moment he walked in. Amelia loved to cook. It was her grounding mechanism, her therapy. But the air in the penthouse was stale, carrying only the faint scent of the cleaning supplies the maids had used 2 days ago. Leonardo frowned, slipping off his wet suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. "Mia?" He walked into the sprawling, open-concept living room. The television was off. The throw blankets on the plush velvet sofa were perfectly folded. He unholstered the Glock 19 from his waist an instinct ingrained in him since childhood, and held it flush against his leg as he cleared the rooms. Kitchen, empty. Dining room, empty. Library, empty. He stepped into the master bedroom. The bed was impeccably made, but something was wrong. The air felt unnaturally still, sucked entirely of life. He walked over to her side of the bed and saw her iPhone sitting squarely on the nightstand. Leonardo's chest tightened. Amelia never went anywhere without her phone. She was addicted to her baking podcasts and texting her best friend, Clara. He holstered the gun and walked back out to the living area, his pulse beginning to thrum a steady, warning beat in his ears. That was when he saw it. Resting on the dark granite of the kitchen island, catching the dim light of the under-cabinet LEDs, were 2 rings. The massive, flawless diamond he had slipped onto her finger, and the platinum band that matched his own. Leonardo stared at them for a long time. The silence in the room suddenly felt deafening, a physical weight pressing down on his lungs. He reached out, his large, scarred hand trembling slightly, and picked up the rings. They were cold. She had been gone for a while. "No," he whispered, the word tearing out of his throat. "No, no, no." Panic, a raw, primal emotion he hadn't felt since he was a child, clawed its way up his throat. Did someone take her? Was this a hit? But there was no sign of a struggle. Nothing was broken. The security alarms hadn't been tripped. He ran back to the bedroom and threw open her closet. Her designer gowns, the ones he bought her and she rarely wore because she said they made her feel like a stuffed sausage, were all there. But her comfortable clothes, her oversized sweaters, her favorite black leggings, her sensible walking shoes, were missing. Her favorite leather duffel bag was gone. She had left him. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Leonardo staggered backward, gripping the doorframe to keep from falling. His wife, his anchor, the only light in his pitch-black world, had packed a bag and walked out. He stumbled into the master bathroom, needing water, needing air. He turned on the gold faucet and splashed freezing water onto his face, gripping the edges of the marble vanity so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. Dark, hollow eyes, a sharp jawline darkened by stubble, a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow. "Look at you," he thought bitterly. "You're a monster." Of course she ran. She finally woke up and saw the beast. He turned to grab a towel, his foot knocking against the brushed steel trash can next to the toilet. The can tipped over, its contents spilling onto the white-tiled floor. A few cotton balls, a discarded makeup wipe, and a white plastic stick. Leonardo froze. Time seemed to slow down to an excruciating crawl. He dropped to his knees, his expensive trousers soaking up a small puddle of water from the floor, and picked up the plastic stick. There, displayed in a small rectangular window, were 2 distinct, unmistakable pink lines. "Pregnant." Leonardo stopped breathing. He stared at the test, his mind struggling to process the impossible information. Amelia was pregnant. She was carrying his child, his flesh and blood. And she had run. She hadn't just left him because she stopped loving him. She had left him because she was terrified of him. She had looked at the life he led, the blood, the violence, the constant shadow of death, and decided it was no place for her child. She had taken his air and vanished into the wind. A sound ripped out of Leonardo's throat, a guttural, agonizing roar of pure devastation that echoed off the marble walls. He crushed the pregnancy test in his fist, the plastic snapping under his sheer strength. He pulled his encrypted cell phone from his pocket and dialed a number. It was answered on the first ring. "Boss?" The voice of Tony Ferrara, his underboss and oldest friend, came through the speaker. "Tony." Leonardo's voice was deathly quiet, stripped of all humanity. It was a voice that made grown men soil themselves. "I need every man we have. Pull them from the docks, pull them from the warehouses, pull them from the clubs." "Dom, what's going on? We're still dealing with the Russians." "I don't give a fuck about the Russians," Leonardo roared, the phone cracking under his grip. "Amelia is gone. She ran." He paused, his chest heaving, tears of absolute rage and terror prickling the corners of his eyes. "And she's pregnant, Tony. She took my baby." Dead silence on the other end of the line. Tony knew exactly what this meant. The city was about to burn. "I want the airports shut down," Leonardo commanded, his voice dropping back to a lethal whisper. "I want every bus station, every train terminal, every toll booth monitored. Bribe the NYPD. Hack the traffic cameras. You find her, Tony. You find my wife, or I swear to God, I will drown this entire fucking city in blood." The basement of the Costa family's primary front, a legitimate, high-end Italian import company in Little Italy, was a hive of frantic, terrified activity. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the frantic clacking of keyboards. Benny, the family's top cybersecurity expert, was sweating profusely through his shirt. Leonardo stood behind him, a dark, looming shadow. He hadn't changed out of his damp suit. He hadn't slept, eaten, or spoken a word that wasn't a direct order in the 12 hours since he found the test. "Talk to me, Benny," Leonardo said, his voice grating like sandpaper. "Boss, she's good. Really good," Benny stammered, frantically toggling between CCTV feeds. "She left the building through the loading dock during a 3-second camera pan delay. The only reason I caught it was a reflection in the side mirror of a parked delivery truck. Look." Benny zoomed in on a pixelated, grainy image. It was barely visible, but Leonardo recognized the unmistakable silhouette of his wife, bundled in a trench coat, carrying a dark bag. His heart gave a painful, violent lurch. "Mia, she walked to the 68th Street subway station," Benny continued, tracking the timeline. "Paid cash for a Metro card. But here's the thing. She rode the train for 3 hours, just back and forth across the boroughs, switching lines, never coming above ground. It's a classic anti-surveillance tactic to shake a tail." "Where did she surface?" Tony Ferrara asked, pacing the room with a cigar clamped between his teeth. "Penn Station." Benny brought up a feed from the bustling train terminal. The timestamp read 4:15 p.m. the previous day. "She goes into a women's restroom in the main concourse." Benny fast-forwarded the footage. 10 minutes later, a figure wearing the same beige trench coat and dark beanie emerged, head down, walking briskly toward the Amtrak ticketing counter. "There," Tony pointed a thick finger at the screen. "She bought a ticket." "Where to?" "Chicago," Benny said, pulling up the passenger manifest. "A woman matching her description boarded the 5 p.m. train to Chicago. Cash transaction under the name Mary Higgins." "Get a crew to Chicago," Tony ordered instantly, pulling out his phone. "Have the boys waiting at Union Station." "Wait," Leonardo interrupted softly. His eyes were locked on the screen, his mind calculating. He leaned closer to the monitor. "Zoom in on her shoes as she leaves the bathroom." Benny complied. The grainy image enlarged, showing a pair of scuffed, oversized men's work boots. Leonardo closed his eyes, a bitter, painful smirk touching his lips. "That's not Amelia." "What do you mean, Dom?" Tony asked, confused. "My wife is deeply insecure about her body, Tony," Leonardo said, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with protective affection. "She hates her ankles. She thinks they're too thick. She would never, under any circumstances, wear chunky work boots that draw attention to her lower legs. She always wears sleek, dark sneakers or flats. Furthermore, look at the gait. It's a shuffle. Amelia glides when she walks. Leonardo opened his eyes, the dark amber irises burning with a terrifying intelligence. She paid a homeless woman in the bathroom to swap coats and buy the ticket. She used her weight and a bulky coat to obscure the fact that the decoy was 50 pounds lighter. It's a misdirection. Benny's fingers flew across the keyboard. Okay, let's look at all other exits from that concourse around the same time. It took 20 minutes of agonizing searching. Finally, Benny gasped. Got her! On a feed from a side exit leading to 8th Avenue, a woman in a black, oversized hoodie and dark leggings emerged. She was carrying the black leather duffel. The camera caught a brief flash of her face as she looked up at the sky. Leonardo placed his hand on the screen, his fingertips tracing the digital outline of her soft cheeks. I'm coming, baby, he thought. I'm going to find you soon. She didn't take a train, Benny said, tracing her movements down the street. She got into a private black car, livery cab, no plates visible. Where the fuck did she go? Tony growled. I don't know, Benny admitted, shrinking back in his chair. She vanished. Leonardo slowly straightened up. Bring me Clara Bennett. An hour later, Clara Bennett, Amelia's best friend, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal pastry chef from Brooklyn, was shoved roughly into the basement room. She stumbled, glaring daggers at the heavily armed men surrounding her. When she saw Leonardo, she stopped, her bravado faltering slightly at the sheer, murderous intensity radiating from him. Leonardo, Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. What the hell is this? Leonardo walked slowly toward her, stopping inches away. He towered over her, radiating a lethal energy. Where is she, Clara? I don't know what you're talking about, Clara lied smoothly, though her pulse fluttered visibly at the base of her throat. Amelia had a spa day. Do not lie to me. Leonardo's voice shattered the quiet of the room like a bomb going off. Clara jumped, terror finally breaking through her facade. My wife is gone. She took my child. And if you think I won't tear this entire city apart, brick by brick, to find her, you don't know who the fuck I am. Clara's eyes widened. She's pregnant. Leonardo studied her face. The shock was genuine. Amelia hadn't told her. Amelia had trusted no one. The realization that his wife had borne the weight of this terrifying discovery entirely alone felt like a knife twisting in his gut. She didn't tell you, Leonardo deduced softly. He stepped back, running a hand over his face. Did she ask you for anything? Money, a car, a favor? No, Clara whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Leo, I swear to God. She's been distant lately. She was paranoid. She said she felt like she was drowning. But she never told me she was planning to run. Clara wiped her eyes, looking up at him with sudden defiance. Can you blame her? Look at you. Look at this. You're a monster, Leo. She's too soft for your world. She was dying inside. Leonardo didn't hit her. He didn't order his men to hurt her. Instead, the words struck him with the force of a bullet, lodging deep in his chest. She was dying inside. Let her go, Leonardo ordered Tony, turning his back on Clara. Boss, she might be useful. I said let her go, Leonardo snapped. As Clara was escorted out, Leonardo stared at the map of the United States projected on the wall. Amelia was incredibly smart. She had outmaneuvered a billion-dollar crime syndicate with cash and a homeless decoy. But she had a weakness. She was entirely alone, pregnant, and she craved safety above all else. She wouldn't go to a city, Leonardo muttered to himself, tracing a line north. She hates the noise. She likes the quiet. She likes the ocean. He looked at Tony. Pull property records for the eastern seaboard. Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. Look for off-season rentals, cash transactions, anything handled under the table in the last 48 hours. 300 miles away, in the sleepy coastal town of Ogunquit, Maine, the icy wind whipped off the Atlantic Ocean, rattling the thin windows of the Seabreeze Motel. Amelia sat on the edge of a lumpy, floral-patterned mattress in room 12. The room smelled of old dampness and cheap pine cleaner, a far cry from the Egyptian cotton and imported Italian marble she was used to. But it was hers. She unzipped the duffel bag and pulled out a thick, oversized wool sweater, pulling it over her head to ward off the biting chill that seeped through the walls. She walked over to the small, scratched vanity mirror and looked at herself. The dark circles under her eyes were profound, her auburn hair a tangled mess. She looked exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone. She placed both hands protectively over her lower stomach, a soft, involuntary smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm going to protect you, even if it means hiding for the rest of my life. He will never find us." But as the wind howled outside, sounding almost like the roar of an angry beast, Amelia couldn't shake the chilling realization that Leonardo Costa was not a man who let things go. He was a hunter, and she had taken his most prized possession. The game of cat and mouse had only just begun. 2 weeks had passed since Amelia slipped away into the damp, anonymous belly of America. Ogunquit, Maine, was picturesque and sleepy, a coastal haven where the Atlantic crashed violently against jagged rocks. To the locals, Amelia was Sarah Lawson, a quiet, grieving widow who paid for her groceries in small bills and kept her eyes glued to the pavement. She had upgraded from the grim motel to a small, drafty carriage house tucked behind an old Victorian estate. The owner, a legally blind octogenarian named Margaret Hughes, asked no questions as long as the rent was paid in cash on the first of the month. For Amelia, survival was a gritty, exhausting reality. Without her private chefs and tailored clothes, her physical insecurities flared with a vengeance. Her body, lush and heavy, felt alien in the cheap, mass-produced clothing she bought from a local discount store. At £240, she couldn't simply throw on a generic pair of jeans and blend in. She had to carefully select oversized men's flannel shirts and thick, dark wool sweaters to hide her growing curves, terrified that any attention drawn to her size might lead to a memory, a description, and ultimately, Leonardo. The morning sickness was the hardest battle. It hit her in vicious waves, leaving her dry heaving over the chipped porcelain toilet in the carriage house. She couldn't risk going to a hospital or a formal OB/GYN clinic, knowing that any medical record could be flagged. Instead, she relied on the town's small independent pharmacy, run by a man named Harold Miller. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she made her fatal error. Amelia stood in the narrow aisles of Miller's pharmacy, shivering slightly as the coastal breeze rattled the front door. She grabbed 2 bottles of over-the-counter prenatal vitamins, carefully avoiding the gaze of the cashier. But her stomach gave a violent lurch, the familiar nausea threatening to expose her right there in the aisle. She needed her ginger candies. Not just any ginger. The Pastiglia Leone ginger lozenges, imported from Turin, Italy. Leonardo used to have them flown in by the crate because they were the only sweet she truly loved after a heavy dinner. She had tried the cheap American brands, but they only made her sicker. Desperate, Amelia approached the counter. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller," she asked, her voice soft. Do you ever special order items? I'm looking for a specific Italian ginger candy for my stomach." Harold Miller, a kind-eyed man in his 60s, smiled warmly. "I can certainly try, Sarah. Write down the name. Might take a week or two, but I use a specialty distributor out of Boston." She wrote it down. She handed over a $50 bill. She walked out, feeling a brief, foolish sense of triumph. 300 miles south, in the suffocating darkness of the Costa family's underground operations room, Benny's computer monitor emitted a sharp, high-pitched ping. Leonardo was slumped in a leather chair, nursing a tumbler of neat whiskey. He looked like a ghost. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his jaw covered in a thick, dark beard he hadn't bothered to shave. The underworld was practically bleeding. Without Leonardo's focused leadership, rival families were testing the boundaries, stealing shipments, and pushing on to Costa turf. Tony Ferrara had begged him to let the men handle the search and focus on the business. Leonardo had broken the nose of the man who suggested it. "Boss," Benny's voice trembled, breaking the heavy silence. I think I got something." Leonardo was out of his chair in a millisecond, the whiskey sloshing onto the expensive rug. He loomed over Benny's shoulder, his breathing ragged. "Show me." "We've been monitoring credit card databases, hospital registries, and pharmacy supply chains for anything unusual," Benny explained, his fingers flying across the keys. "I set up a secondary algorithm to flag specific items associated with Amelia's habits. I didn't expect it to work, but an independent pharmacy in Ogunquit, Maine, just placed a wholesale special order for Pastigli Leone ginger lozenges." Leonardo's heart stopped. "The lozenges? His Mia's favorite. Is it a regular customer?" Tony asked, stepping up beside Leonardo. "No." Benny pulled up the public directory. "Harold Miller, the owner, usually only stocks domestic brands. The order was flagged through his Boston supplier an hour ago. And get this, Ogunquit is a tiny town. Off-season population is less than 1,000. "Get into their cameras," Leonardo commanded, his voice trembling with a terrifying, suppressed energy. "Now." "Boss, it's a mom-and-pop shop. Their security system is probably from the 90s. "Hack it, Benny, or I'll cut off your fingers and do it myself," Leonardo roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. Benny swallowed hard and typed furiously. It took him 12 agonizing minutes to bypass the outdated security wall of the local ISP. Finally, a grainy, black-and-white feed from the pharmacy's overhead camera flickered onto the screen. Leonardo leaned in, his eyes darting frantically across the screen. He watched the feed from earlier that afternoon. A woman walked into the frame. She was bundled in a bulky, dark flannel jacket, her head down. But Leonardo didn't need to see her face. He recognized the soft, unmistakable curve of her hips beneath the oversized fabric. He recognized the way she shifted her weight slightly to the left when she stood still, a habit she developed after spraining her ankle 2 years ago. And as she reached up to push a stray lock of thick, auburn hair behind her ear, the overhead light caught the distinct, terrified set of her jaw. Leonardo's breath hitched. A solitary tear spilled over his lashes, tracking down his rough cheek. "Mia Thasul." "That's her," Tony breathed, recognizing the boss's wife even through the poor video quality. "She's in Maine." "Get the jet ready," Leonardo whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal, obsessive possessiveness. "Take Jonathan Weaver, Sammy, and Paulie. Nobody else. I don't want an army spooking her. We leave in 20 minutes. And if she runs again?" Tony asked cautiously. Leonardo turned to his underboss, his eyes entirely black, stripped of anything resembling mercy. She won't. Because this time, I'm locking her in a cage so tight even God won't be able to find her. The skies over Maine were bruised a violent, stormy purple by the time the blacked-out SUV rolled into the quiet streets of Ogunquit. The rain was falling in thick, freezing sheets, turning the coastal roads into sick, treacherous pathways. Amelia was completely unaware of the approaching storm. She had just finished her shift, scrubbing dishes at a local diner, a grueling, under-the-table job she had taken to preserve her cash. Her back ached terribly, the extra weight she carried making standing on the hard linoleum floor for 6 hours feel like torture. Her thighs were chafed, her feet were swollen, and her lower abdomen throbbed with a dull, stretching ache. She pulled her thick raincoat tighter around her trembling shoulders as she walked down the unlit gravel path toward the carriage house. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, masking the sound of tires rolling slowly to a stop down the street. Amelia fumbled with her keys, her fingers numb from the cold. She finally managed to unlock the heavy wooden door, stepping into the small, dimly lit living room of her rental. She locked the deadbolt behind her, sliding the chain into place. A heavy sigh escaped her lips as she dropped her purse onto the worn armchair. "Just you and me," she whispered to her stomach, rubbing the slight, rounding swell beneath her damp clothes. "Is that what you tell yourself, Mia?" The voice came from the shadows of the small kitchenette. It was deep, raspy, and achingly familiar. Amelia's blood turned to ice. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently she thought it might break through her chest. The air in the room instantly vanished. A figure stepped out of the darkness. Leonardo. He was standing there in a tailored black suit that looked completely out of place in the shabby room. He looked exhausted, older, his face gaunt and shadowed with a terrifying intensity. His amber eyes were locked onto her, stripping away her oversized clothes, seeing right through the layers she used to hide herself. Amelia couldn't breathe. Her legs gave out, her heavy frame collapsing against the front door. "How?" she gasped out, panic clawing at her throat. "How did you find me?" Leonardo took a slow, deliberate step toward her. He moved like a predator, silent, calculating, entirely in control. "You thought you could leave me?" he asked softly, the danger in his tone wrapping around her like a physical chain. "You thought you could take what is mine and just disappear?" "Don't come near me!" Amelia shrieked, pressing herself flat against the wood of the door. She wrapped her arms protectively over her stomach, her eyes wide with absolute terror. "Please, Leo, just let me go." Leonardo's gaze dropped to her hands. He stared at her stomach, the realization of what she was carrying hitting him anew. The muscles in his jaw ticked violently. "Let you go." He let out a dark, broken laugh. "I tore New York apart looking for you. I haven't slept in 2 weeks. I would have burned this entire country to the ground to find you, Mia, and you ask me to let you go?" "You're a murderer!" she screamed, tears streaming hotly down her cold cheeks. "I saw you, Leo. I saw what you did to Frankie. I can't let you turn my child into a monster." He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides. Amelia tried to scramble away, but she wasn't fast enough. Leonardo's large, scarred hands grabbed her upper arms, hoisting her up from the floor with terrifying ease. He slammed her back against the door, pinning her there. "Our child," Leonardo corrected, his face mere inches from hers. She could smell the rain, the whiskey, and the familiar, intoxicating scent of his expensive cologne. "You are carrying my blood, Amelia. My heir. Did you really think I would allow my child to be raised in poverty, in hiding? by a woman who is too weak to accept the reality of the world we live in? Amelia sobbed, her heavy breasts heaving against his solid chest. She felt so utterly defeated, her plush body completely powerless against his brute strength. "I'm not weak. I survived. I hid from you. You delayed the inevitable," he murmured, his anger suddenly giving way to a twisted, overwhelming obsession. He let go of one of her arms to trace the tear-stained curve of her cheek. His thumb brushed over her full lips, his touch agonizingly gentle compared to the violence in his eyes. "Look at you. You're shivering. You're exhausted. You're wearing cheap rags that don't fit your beautiful body. This isn't a life, Mia." "It's safe," she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Nowhere is safe without me," he replied, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. He leaned in, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. "You belong to me, every inch of your beautiful soft body. You are my wife. And this baby," his large hand slid down, resting heavily and possessively over her swollen stomach. "This baby is a Costa, and you are coming home." "No," Amelia cried, weakly trying to push his massive chest away. "I won't go back. I won't let you control me." Leonardo pulled back, his eyes hardening into twin chips of dark amber. The fleeting moment of tenderness vanished, replaced by the ruthless dawn of the New York underworld. "You don't have a choice," Leonardo stated coldly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Amelia's eyes went wide. "Leo, what is that? What are you doing?" "Just a mild sedative, Mia. To calm you down for the flight," he said, his grip on her arm tightening like a vice. "You're coming home, and you will never, ever leave my sight again." Before Amelia could scream, before she could fight the heavy, exhausting weight of her own body, Leonardo plunged the needle into her shoulder. The world tilted violently on its axis, the edges of the room turning black as the monster she married pulled her into the inescapable dark. Consciousness returned to Amelia, not as a sudden awakening, but as a slow, agonizing crawl through thick molasses. The first thing she registered was the smell. Gone was the damp, pine-scented chill of the Maine coastline. Instead, the air was heavily perfumed with the rich, unmistakable scent of white lilies, beeswax, and Leonardo's signature bergamot cologne. She fluttered her eyes open, a dull ache throbbing at the base of her skull from the sedative. She was lying in a bed so vast it felt like an ocean of Egyptian cotton and silk. But it wasn't their penthouse in the city. The walls were constructed of thick, reinforced stone, draped in heavy velvet tapestries. Bulletproof glass lined the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, which looked out over a sprawling, snow-dusted forest. She pushed herself up, panic instantly seizing her chest. She grabbed her swollen belly, breathing a sigh of relief when she felt a soft, tiny flutter against her palm. The baby was safe. "You've been asleep for nearly 18 hours. Amelia jumped, her eyes darting to the corner of the cavernous room. Leonardo was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair, half swallowed by the shadows. He had finally shaved, his sharp jawline smooth, but his amber eyes were bloodshot and bruised with exhaustion. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, sprawling ink of his syndicate tattoos wrapping around his muscular forearms. "Where are we?" Amelia croaked, her throat bone dry. "Upstate. The family compound in the Adirondacks," Leonardo replied, his voice a low, soothing rumble that betrayed none of the violence from the night before. He stood, picking up a crystal glass of water from a side table, and walked slowly to the edge of the bed. The perimeter is secured by 60 armed men. There are thermal cameras in the woods, biometric locks on every door, and an anti-aircraft system on the roof. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning slightly under his massive weight. He offered her the glass. "You couldn't leave this property even if you grew wings, Mia." Amelia ignored the water, her eyes flashing with a defiant, terrified heat. "You kidnapped me. You drugged your pregnant wife." "I brought my family home," Leonardo corrected smoothly, though a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Drink the water, Amelia. Dr. Preston is waiting in the hall to give you a full ultrasound. I've flown in a private chef from Manhattan to cook whatever you crave. Your closet is stocked with clothes custom-tailored to fit you." His gaze dragged down her body. She was wearing a delicate sheer silk nightgown that clung to her heavy curves, leaving her deeply exposed. For a moment, the cold mob boss vanished, replaced by a man utterly starved for the woman in front of him. He reached out, his calloused fingertips brushing gently over the plump swell of her thigh beneath the silk. Amelia flinched, pulling her legs to her chest. "Don't touch me." Leonardo's hand froze midair. A flash of genuine hurt crossed his eyes before the icy mask slipped back into place. "I am not the enemy, Mia. Everything I do, the blood I spill, the empire I run, it's all to keep you safe, to keep our child safe. You think running away to a rat-infested motel was protecting our baby? What if a rival family found you before I did? They would have cut that child out of you just to send me a message. You're the reason they would want to hurt me," Amelia screamed, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "I was a normal girl from Queens, Leo. I worked in a bakery. And now I'm trapped in a fortress because the man I married executes people in his office while I'm making his tea." The room fell deadly silent. The echo of her scream hung in the heavy air. Leonardo didn't yell back. He set the water glass down on the nightstand. He leaned closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body, and gently framed her tear-streaked face in his large hands. His thumbs wiped away her tears with agonizing tenderness. "I know I am a monster, Mia," he whispered, his voice trembling with a dark, twisted devotion. "I have never pretended to be anything else, but I am your monster. I worship the ground you walk on. I worship this soft, beautiful body that you spend so much time hating. I would burn the entire world to ash just to keep you warm." He leaned down and pressed a fervent, lingering kiss against the soft curve of her stomach. "You are never leaving me again. You will stay here. You will be my queen, and you will learn to accept that you belong to the darkness as much as you belong to me." He stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. "I'll send Dr. Preston in. Rest, Mia." When the heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, the magnetic lock engaging with a sickening thud, Amelia buried her face in her hands and sobbed. The cage was gilded with diamonds and silk, but the bars were made of impenetrable steel. She had underestimated his obsession. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia realized that physical escape was an absolute impossibility. Leonardo had effectively built a kingdom around her and thrown away the key. He was terrifyingly attentive. If she casually mentioned missing the taste of a specific sourdough from a bakery in San Francisco, a fresh loaf arrived via private jet the next morning. If she winced from a backache, a world-class masseuse was brought to her room within the hour. He treated her heavy, changing body like a sacred temple. As she grew larger with the pregnancy, her old insecurities flared violently. She felt massive, clumsy, and undesirable. But Leonardo would spend hours in the evenings tracing the new stretch marks on her hips, kissing the thick curve of her thighs, murmuring prayers against her skin in rapid, breathless Italian. He made her feel like a goddess, even as he held her prisoner. It was psychological warfare. He was trying to love her into submission. He wanted to spoil her so thoroughly that she would forget the blood on his hands. But Amelia wasn't the naive girl from Queens anymore. She spent her days walking the expansive gardens of the compound, her mind sharp and calculating. The desperation of Maine had hardened into a souled diamond-like resolve. If she couldn't run from the Costa family, she would have to conquer it. She would have to use the very thing that made her weak, her softness, her empathy, and Leonardo's blind, paralyzing obsession with her, to rewrite the rules of the underworld. 7 months into her pregnancy, the crisp autumn air had turned into a bitter, freezing winter. The compound was blanketed in a thick layer of snow. Amelia sat by the roaring fireplace in the library, a heavy cashmere blanket draped over her lap. Her stomach was beautifully round and prominent now, the life inside her kicking with vigorous strength. The heavy double doors of the library slammed open. Tony Ferrara stormed in, his face pale, followed closely by Leonardo. Leonardo was practically vibrating with rage, his suit jacket discarded, a loaded submachine gun gripped tightly in his right hand. Amelia didn't flinch. She simply looked up from her book, her expression serene. "The Russians hit the port in Brooklyn," Tony was saying, his voice frantic. "They took out 6 of our guys, Dom. They're making a move. If we don't retaliate tonight and wipe out their leadership, they'll think we're weak because you've been up here for months." Leonardo's jaw clamped tight. He looked at Amelia, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second before the lethal, cold dawn returned. "Prep the choppers. Get a strike team of 20 men. We burn their Brighton Beach Club to the ground. Nobody walks out." "Wait." Amelia's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room with absolute authority. Tony stopped in his tracks. Leonardo turned around, his brow furrowed. "Mia, go to your room. This is family business." "No," Amelia said calmly. She pushed the blanket aside and stood up. Despite her size, despite the extra 50 pounds of pregnancy weight she carried on her naturally heavy frame, she moved with a quiet, undeniable majesty. She walked across the Persian rug until she stood chest to chest with her husband. "You aren't going to Brighton Beach," Amelia said, looking directly into his amber eyes. Tony scoffed nervously. "With all due respect, Mrs. Costa, you don't understand the streets." "Shut your mouth, Tony, or I'll have Leo cut your tongue out," Amelia said, not even glancing at the underboss. Tony's eyes went wide. Leonardo stared at his wife, a mixture of shock and dark, thrilling awe washing over his face. This wasn't the terrified woman he had dragged out of a Maine motel. Amelia reached out and placed her soft, plump hand over the cold steel of Leonardo's gun, gently pushing the barrel down. "If you go to Brighton Beach tonight, Leo, you start a war. Wars mean retaliation. Retaliation means they come here. They come for me. They come for your son." Leonardo's breathing hitched. "I will never let them touch you." "You can't stop a bullet fired from a mile away in the woods," Amelia countered smoothly. "You can't stop a bomb under a car. You want to protect me? Then you have to stop thinking like a street thug and start thinking like a king." "What are you saying, Mia?" Leonardo whispered. "I spent the last 2 months reviewing the financial ledgers you keep in the safe," Amelia revealed, her voice steady. "The illegal arms dealing and the extortion rackets bring in less than 30% of your total revenue, but they cause 99% of the violence. Your legitimate real estate holdings, the import-export logistics, and the casino fronts are clean. They make billions." She stepped closer, cupping his face in her hands. "Sell the port territory to the Russians. Tonight. Give it to them, let them have the guns and the drugs. That makes me look weak, Leonardo growled, his pride bristling. No, it makes you a ghost, Amelia corrected fiercely. You transition the Costa family fully into legitimate enterprise. You wash the blood off your hands. You do this, Leo, and I will stay. I will stop fighting you. I will stand by your soul in the light, and I will be the mother to your heir. But if you walk out that door tonight with that gun—" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a deadly, icy whisper. "I will find a way to end my own life, and you will lose us both forever." Leonardo froze. The color completely drained from his face. The gun slipped from his grip, clattering loudly onto the hardwood floor. He looked into her eyes and saw no bluff. He saw a mother backed into a corner, wielding the only weapon she had left. His total, all-consuming addiction to her. Tony took a step back, realizing he was witnessing the fundamental shifting of an entire empire. The most ruthless mafia boss in North America was being brought to his knees by a soft, curvy baker from Queens. Leonardo fell to his knees in front of her. He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, pressing his face into her pregnant belly. His shoulders shook as he surrendered completely to her will. "Okay," Leonardo choked out, his voice wrecked with emotion. "Okay, Mia. Whatever you want. Just don't leave me. Please." Amelia ran her fingers through his dark hair, looking out the window at the falling snow. She had lost her freedom, but she had won the war. She was no longer a captive. She was the architect of their future. "Make the call, Tony," Amelia ordered, her voice cold and commanding. "Tell the Russians the port is theirs. The Costa family is closed for business." That concludes the intense, heart-stopping saga of Amelia and Leonardo. From a desperate escape to Maine, to a terrifying confrontation, and finally, a brilliant psychological checkmate. Amelia proved that true strength isn't about being ruthless. It's about outsmarting the monster and changing the rules of the game to protect the ones you love. The soft, curvy girl from Queens didn't just survive the mafia, ruled it. If you loved this thrilling roller coaster of mafia romance, betrayal, and dark devotion, please hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic, real-life dramas.